Imagine inheriting a country where nearly every naira the government earned was already spoken for, consumed by debt before a single road could be repaired, before a single clinic could be stocked, before a single teacher could be paid on time. Imagine stepping into a role where the very foundations of the nation's economy had been quietly rotting for years beneath layers of policy that everyone knew was broken but no one had the courage to dismantle. Now imagine looking at 220 million people, some of the most talented, resilient, and hungry for greatness people on the face of this earth, and saying, "Not on my watch." Things change. Starting now. That is the story of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. And it is a story worth telling in full. Born on the 29th of March 1952, in Lagos, Tinubu did not begin life in the corridors of power. He grew up in Iseliko, one of the oldest and most densely populated communities in Nigeria's commercial capital, a place where survival is schooling and ambition is the only currency that matters. He would go on to study accounting at Chicago State University in the United States, sharpening a mind already hardened by experience into something precise, strategic, and long-range in its thinking. After building a career in global corporations, working with Mobil Oil and Deloitte Haskins and Sells, he made a decision that would define the next 5 decades of his life. He came home. And he entered politics. In 1993, he won a Senate seat under the Social Democratic Party. But it was what happened next that revealed the true measure of the man. When General Sani Abacha's military regime annulled the June 12 election, the freest election in Nigeria's history, and began crushing dissent, Tinubu did not stay quiet. He became a founding force within NADICO, the National Democratic Coalition, a movement of Nigerians who risked imprisonment, exile, and death to fight for democracy. He paid a personal price for that conviction. Forced into exile, he spent years abroad, waiting, not with despair, but with the patience of someone who understood that history has a long arc, and that those willing to endure to the end are often the ones who shape its outcome. When democracy returned to Nigeria in 1999, Tinubu returned too, and he didn't return quietly. He ran for governor of Lagos State and won. Then he ran again in 2003 and won again. What he did in those 8 years transformed Lagos from a city struggling under its own weight into the economic engine of an entire continent. When he took office, Lagos State was generating roughly 600 million naira per month in internally generated revenue. By the time he left, that number had grown to over 5 billion naira monthly. He didn't conjure that money from the air. He built the tax administration systems, the governance architecture, and the institutional discipline that made Lagos one of the most financially sophisticated subnational governments in all of Africa. That work was the blueprint, the proof of concept, for everything that would come later on the national stage. After his governorship, Tinubu became perhaps the most consequential political architect in Nigeria's recent history. He helped build the coalition that ended 16 years of PDP rule, shepherding disparate political forces into the All Progressives Congress and engineering the historic 2015 election that brought President Muhammadu Buhari to power, a democratic transfer the world had doubted Nigeria could achieve. He had been kingmaker for decades. In 2023, he decided the crown was his. On the 29th of May 2023, before a packed Eagle Square in Abuja, Bola Ahmed Tinubu was sworn in as the 16th President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. And within minutes, not days, not weeks, but minutes, he made a decision that signaled, to every observer at home and abroad, that this presidency would not be defined by timidity. Subsidy is gone, he declared. It is over. For decades, Nigeria had subsidized petrol prices, spending what eventually amounted to billions of dollars annually to keep fuel artificially cheap at the pump. On paper, it was a social program. In reality, economists and institutions from the IMF to the World Bank had long documented it as one of the most inefficient, corruption-ridden expenditure lines in any developing economy, a system that disproportionately benefited wealthy fuel importers and cross-border smugglers while delivering pennies of genuine value to the poorest Nigerians it claimed to serve. Nigeria was spending over $10 billion a year on this system. $10 billion that could not build a hospital, could not lay a kilometer of road, could not put a textbook in a child's hands. Tinubu ended it. On day one. That is not the act of a man who came to manage decline. That is the act of a man who came to rebuild. He followed immediately with a second structural reform of equal significance, the unification of Nigeria's foreign exchange regime. For years, Nigeria had operated multiple exchange rates simultaneously, creating a gap between the official and black market rates that functioned as an invisible tax on ordinary Nigerians while enabling an elite few to profit from the arbitrage. It was a system that strangled foreign investment, warped economic signals, and made planning, for businesses, for families, for government itself, a near-impossible act of guesswork. By moving to a single, market-reflective exchange rate, the Tinubu administration removed that distortion and, for the first time in years, sent a credible signal to the world that Nigeria was serious about doing business on honest terms. The international community took notice. In April 2025, Fitch Ratings upgraded Nigeria's sovereign credit rating from B- to B, revising the outlook from negative to stable, specifically citing the administration's policy reforms, including exchange rate liberalization and the removal of fuel subsidies. Moody's followed suit, lifting Nigeria's issuer rating to B3 with a stable outlook. Both agencies pointed to what they called Nigeria's improved economic foresight and clearer policy direction. Foreign direct investment, which had fallen to just $22 million in the first quarter of 2023, surged to $191 million in the first quarter of 2024, nearly a tenfold increase in a single year. Nigeria's foreign exchange reserves climbed to over $42 billion by September 2025, the highest level since 2019. The stock market hit record highs, with the all-share index crossing 130,000 points. Trade surpluses were recorded for 5 consecutive quarters. The macro numbers alone do not tell the full story of this transformation. What they represent is a fundamental shift in the structure and credibility of Nigeria's economy, the kind of shift that does not happen in one budget cycle or one press conference, but through sustained, courageous policy choices made under enormous pressure. Real GDP grew by 4.6% in the fourth quarter of 2024, with full-year growth of 3.4%, among the strongest annual performances in a decade, validated by the World Bank as the fastest economic growth Nigeria had seen in nearly 10 years. The fiscal deficit, which stood at 5.4% of GDP in 2023, fell sharply to 3% in 2024, while national revenue surged from 16.8 trillion naira to over 31.9 trillion naira. The debt service to revenue ratio, which had reached a suffocating 97% when the administration took office, was reduced to below 50% by 2024 and below 40% by end of year. Nigeria's debt to GDP ratio stands at 38.8%, comfortably below the 60% limit set by Nigeria's own Fiscal Responsibility Act, and well below the 70% threshold set by both ECOWAS and the World Bank. Tax reform has been another pillar of this transformation agenda. In June 2025, President Tinubu signed 4 landmark tax reform bills into law: the Nigeria Tax Act, the Nigeria Tax Administration Act, the Nigeria Revenue Service Establishment Act, and the Joint Revenue Board Establishment Act, laws designed to unify Nigeria's fragmented tax system, eliminate the burden of multiple taxation, and bring more businesses into the formal economy. Under these reforms, essential goods and services, food, education, and healthcare will attract 0% VAT. Rent, public transportation, and renewable energy will be fully exempted from VAT, directly reducing household costs for working Nigerians. The tax to GDP ratio, which had languished below 10% for years, rose to 13.5% in 2024, a remarkable leap that reflects the administration's focus on building a revenue base no longer purely dependent on crude oil. And speaking of oil, Nigeria surpassed its OPEC production quota for 3 consecutive months, averaging 1.71 million barrels per day. The Dangote refinery, Africa's largest, became a game-changer for the downstream sector, beginning to supply refined products domestically and driving fuel prices from over 1,000 naira per litre toward more manageable levels, with targeted plans to reach all 36 states. Infrastructure is being rebuilt at a scale Nigeria has rarely seen. The Lagos-Calabar Coastal Highway, the Sokoto-Badagry Superhighway, the Abuja-Kaduna-Kano Road rehabilitation, and ongoing rail expansion projects were formally flagged off in June 2025, forming part of a national connectivity push that aims to bring every region of the country into closer economic contact. The power sector recorded an all-time peak generation of 5,713 megawatts in March 2025, the highest in Nigeria's history. Solar-powered electricity has been delivered to over 500,000 rural households under the Nigeria Electrification Project, with a target of 2 million households by 2026. In healthcare, 402 billion naira has been allocated to health infrastructure in the 2025 budget, alongside 282 billion naira for the Basic Healthcare Fund. A National Health Fellows program is placing young medical professionals in all 774 local government areas across the country. $2 billion in fiber optic investment is being mobilized to bring high-speed digital connectivity to a new generation of Nigerian entrepreneurs, students, and innovators. The minimum wage has been raised to 70,000 naira. A 200 billion naira intervention fund has been established to support micro, small, and medium enterprises, the engine room of Nigeria's real economy. The administration's 2025 budget, titled the Budget of Restoration, Securing Peace, Rebuilding Prosperity, allocated 31% of all expenditure to security, defense, education, health, and infrastructure combined. It is a budget that speaks the language of priorities, not promises. Defense and security received 4.91 trillion naira. Infrastructure received 4.06 trillion naira. Education received 3.52 trillion naira. Health received 2.48 trillion naira. These are not talking points. They are line items, real allocations to real sectors that determine whether a nation rises or stagnates. What Bola Ahmed Tinubu has set in motion is not a collection of standalone policies. It is a coherent, long-range vision for what Nigeria can become when its government stops managing weakness and starts building strength, when it stops subsidizing the past and starts investing in the future. The Renewed Hope Agenda, as the administration calls it, is exactly that, a bet on the idea that Nigeria's best days are not behind it. That a country with this land, this talent, this spirit, and this history deserves more than what it has been given. And that the work of giving it more begins, as all serious work does, with courage. There are 26 more months left in this administration's first term. The reforms are in motion. The foundations are being laid. The direction is set. What Nigeria does with this moment, whether it stays the course, deepens the progress, and builds on what has begun, will determine not just the next election, but the next generation. A nation of 220 million people is watching. The continent is watching. And the world, increasingly, is watching too. Because Nigeria, with the right leadership, the right reforms, and the right resolve, is not just Africa's largest economy. It is Africa's greatest story waiting to be told. And that story is being written right now.